So the Jazz are about to start a nasty 7-game road trip headed out east. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and we're going to get into that. So their first game is going to be going down to San Antonio, which definitely is a game that I'm really hoping for some revenge. While the Jazz did win their last game against San Antonio in the bubble, in the regular season, they were 0-3 against the Spurs in just some absolutely horrendous performances where the Jazz's offense and defense just both decided to go down to the waterfront and, or the Riverwalk, whatever it is in San Antonio, and not actually show up to this arena. So I'm really hoping that they're able to come out and just put that behind them and blow a team out that they should blow out. Because while the Spurs do have some great players in DeRozan and in Aldridge, they just don't have enough to really compete with who the Jazz have offensively and defensively. The Jazz are just a much more complete team. So what are your thoughts on the Spurs games of last year, Dale, and what's going to happen this year?
Here's my conspiracy theory that Quinn Snyder used to be an assistant for Greg Popovich, and he didn't want him to lose his playoff streak. So that they threw the games until the Spurs were officially out of the playoffs in the bubble. And then Greg Popovich let him get that one.
That's why they got a win. That as much as I'd hate knowing that Quinn did that, that would almost make it better than losing to that team the way we did as many times as we did. So, I mean, in all seriousness here, this is a rough 7-game road trip, not in the sense that the Jazz are playing insanely good teams, but that, it's, 7 games, 11 days, 2 back-to-backs. Even if you're playing the Knicks, if you're playing them the game after you played the Nets, that's going to be a harder game just based on the fact that you didn't get as much sleep the night before. You're totally off schedule. Hopefully, I'm not sure. Hopefully the Jazz are just able to stay in the same hotel both nights and just bust to both games. But it's going to be hard to go out and to do these 7-game road trips, not only because they're hard in general, but with COVID restrictions, you can't just go out and blow off steam and enjoy being where you're at. You're kind of in the hotel room, at the gym, or at the game. There's not a lot of options there.
Yeah, and something interesting to look at is the COVID restrictions are different in every state. And so in some states, it's a lot more strict than it is here in Utah. And I know in Los Angeles, teams who go play in Los Angeles, they can't have team meetings. It all has to be over Zoom because there's too many people in one room for that. That's over the limit. So that could be interesting that when you're on the road this long, let's say they have a couple slip-ups against the Spurs and the Nets in their first 2 games, it may be tougher to really work that out if they're in a state that they can't actually meet. And so that's something interesting to look at. I don't know how big of an impact that will make because obviously this team has been together long enough. They're professionals. They should be able to figure it out. So it's interesting, though, to think about and see how that might impact it.
So that is really interesting, actually, especially where in New York, I believe they have some stricter COVID-19 rules and restrictions put in place. So that's something I didn't really think about, even though the NBA has really strict rules in general, that there can actually be states that take that a step farther. Before we get too in depth, what are your kind of expectations on where you expect the Jazz to finish over these 7 games, record wise?
So they have some, they have some games that they definitely should win, especially the last 3. They have the Pistons, the Cavs, the Wizards. I expect them to win, but I feel like the Jazz, they come more prepared to these games that they games against the Nets and the Bucks because they know it's going to be a tough game. I feel like they sometimes fall into the tendency of overlooking some of the smaller teams. I feel like the Spurs are a worse team than they were last year, and just losing that playoff streak Even though they are looking better, at least right now, I think the Jazz should beat them. Even though a while ago, I think I predicted when they had 8-2, I think the Spurs were one of the games that they lost in my 8-2 start. So I expect them to beat the Spurs. I expect them to take one of the games against either the Nets or the Bucks, but lose the other. And I'm guessing they'll drop one of the games either against the Knicks, the Pistons, the Cavs, or the Wizards, which they should win all of those, but I feel like it would be a little on the optimistic side to say that they win all of those. So I think they'll come out with 2 losses. So 5-2, which is respectable, especially since they do have some tough games on this trip.
Yeah, I think 6-1 is what you dream for. 5-2 is like the most realistic, optimistic choice. I'm gonna go with 4-3. Since I feel like you're right that they're gonna drop one of those games. As much as I'd hate to see them lose to the Wizards, they are coming in from Cleveland to DC to go play that game. So you do have, Beal and Westbrook, who are both good players and are very capable of putting up points. So having to face them on the back end of a back-to-back is going to be hard. So I think they're going to go 4-3, which puts them ending at 7-5, which I'd prefer to see 8-4, but we'll see. I think it's going to be a really hard stretch, even though there are some crappy teams that are playing. So I'm at least happy that we're not going out and playing the best the East has to offer on this road trip, or else I'd be a lot more pessimistic about where I think the Jazz are going to end up afterwards.
Yeah, that'd be rough. It's just a tour of the top 5 teams in the East, just game after game.
I mean, I'd be fine with an Orlando Magic game because I don't think they're as good as their record shows. But I don't want to go out and see Miami and the 76ers and the Bucks, and the Nets like that and the Celtics. That would just be a lot more challenging of a schedule than what they currently have.
Yeah, and this is a interesting road trip because normally in a normal season, we'd be talking about road trips as the tough because they have to play against opposing crowds and be the bad guy night after night after night. But now, any places that have fans, there's not many, so I don't think the fans have nearly as big of an effect on the game as they would in a normal season. But the tough part here is just all the traveling. They're just going on a tour of the Eastern United States. And they don't have much time to rest between games. One interesting thing to think about is sometimes, even though they can't go out as much and just kind of enjoy the city nearly as much as they would be able to, like they would have last season, but sometimes these long road trips help a team kind of focus because they're away from home. Like the only thing they really have to focus on is basketball. Maybe that's enough for this team to kind of reset, realize that they dropped those 2 games that they shouldn't have. Maybe they make a couple mistakes on this road trip, but then they kind of catch on fire towards the end, which is what I'm hoping to see. And then they return back and they've fixed some of those things when they can stay focused for almost 2 weeks on the road. That's like hopeful thinking. Teams have done it in the past, but it's definitely not the normal thing. Normally teams come back a little tired from road trips, especially after 2 back-to-backs on that trip.
Yeah. And I mean, something interesting to look at though, is the Jazz are 1-2 at home and 2-0 on the road. So that's typically not what you see from the Jazz. And again, like we're saying in everything right now, small sample size, but it could just be that somehow, somewhere, home court advantage actually starts to hurt with COVID, and we see teams just going out and putting up a lot better scores and records on the road. The Jazz could come back from this and be like 8-1, 7-2 on the road, and just be putting together a lot more impressive road season than they've had for a long time, where typically they lose, 5 games at home tops, and they're around 500 on the road. it could be vice versa this year, just due to like fans just providing this really weird energy due to COVID restrictions.
Yeah, and home court doesn't mean nearly as much. I wonder if it reminds some of the players of like, because there's only 1,500 fans in the stadium here, and so it's almost like they're playing back at like a high school game, like a packed high school arena, but the arena is huge. It's like playing in the high school state playoffs. So that might kind of be a little weird to them after, because a lot of these players have been in the league for a while and they're used to packed arenas and games getting loud and down the stretch. It's when they're away, like it's loud when they're on offense and everyone's screaming at them while they're yelling their free throws. Well, they're shooting their free throws. So I wonder if that's just a weird thing that kind of throws the players off. That might have been one of the reasons why the Jazz had a tough time starting out games at first, because they did play in the bubble, but like going back to real arenas with no one there is a little bit different as well.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned is like how it's going to be difficult to come back and like start playing again after this road trip. And one nice thing is, while they only have one game at home before they have to go off on the road again, it is against the Atlanta Hawks. So while you still have to make sure to play enough defense to beat them, that's not going to be the worst team to end up playing after a road trip. It's a team that, as long as you're dedicated and diligent, you should be able to easily put up more points than them, because, you know, there's all this hype on Trae Young, and I understand that he looks amazing on the offensive end. But when you might as well just leave him on the offensive end the whole time and cherry pick with the amount of defense he plays, not super high on him. So,
yeah, the Hawks are an interesting team this year. They're a team that a lot of people are probably they're one of those teams that are benefited by the small sample size, where they've looked good in the games that they've played so far. And they do have a lot of new pieces. They brought in Rondo. They brought in Bogdanovich. They brought in Clint Capella. So they do have some. They're a much deeper team than they were last year. So that is, I agree, the Jazz should definitely beat them. But that's one game that if the Jazz think they're playing the Hawks from last season and they come in thinking, okay, like Trae Young, he's going to drop 50 on us, but we'll still beat the team by 20, then that's not the right attitude going in to play the Hawks.
No, they definitely have changed. And you are right. I wonder how much the Capella Gobert matchup in that game is actually probably going to be one of the more exciting matchups to watch. Just with, I feel like, a lot of debate and a lot of trash on Rudy saying Capella's much better. But I mean, Capella does provide you more of an offensive spark than Gobert does from him putting the ball in the hoop. But I mean, Rudy Gobert is the better defensive center. So seeing that matchup is always a fun matchup to see. And it will be interesting to see if they space the floor like the Rockets did, which really hurt Gobert when Capella was there, just with how the Rockets played basketball, or if Atlanta's playing a better style of basketball for Rudy Gobert to defend against.
Yeah, as far as like just a straight up matchup, not taking into account the overall style of the team's offense, I would take Gobert over Capella every day of the week. Even though Capella is more explosive and athletic, Gobert just brings a lot more to the table when you factor in everything. But that is true. Like the Hawks do have people that can like drive from the outside in or space the floor a lot better. And that is one thing that Gobert had a tough time whenever they played the Rockets, is they always had someone who he had to worry about on the perimeter coming in to score on him that he couldn't give as much attention to Capella. And that's probably going to be the same against the Hawks.
Yeah. Well, we went a bit past the 7-game road trip and gave you a little Atlanta preview as well. In the comments below, please let us know what you think the Jazz are going to accomplish on this road trip, their record, who you think they're going to lose to, and what are your big keys for them winning these games and for them coming out on the other end of this on an upward trajectory. Thanks so much again for watching. Please like and subscribe, and have a great weekend.